Part 4, Changing Your Mind. Chapter 10, How to Be Wrong. Oh my gosh, this all ties into kind of like a wow, it's all kind of connected with my kind of journey to learn about wisdom and judgment calls. So, back in the beginning when I watched the TED Talk from Julia Galef, I realized like, okay, maybe I should learn more about judgment. And so I typed into YouTube uh, good judgment, how to make good judgment, and I came across videos about forecasters, and I learned a bit about them. And what's interesting about it is that Julia kind of brings that to the surface here as well. And what's interesting is that these super forecasters, they're normal people, but they beat the CIA and people who have like top knowledge, secret information. But these super forecasters are really good at just predicting the future, predicting what's going to happen. And because of that, the U.S. kind of disbanded their other kind of like their original quote unquote forecaster um, kind of theory, I guess, or the forecasters they had before, and they went and they gravitated towards super forecasters. The super forecasters were only armed with Google, and like the knowledge that's floating around in public everyday life. And what Julia is saying is that what's the difference was not that they were just more right, it was that they were really great at being wrong. So let's see where that takes us. All right, so this is actually going into a very interesting kind of territory. It's about what is it that makes people good at being wrong? Is that they're fine with kind of readjusting their beliefs very slightly as they get new information. They're constantly updating themselves. They're constantly saying, okay, maybe I was wrong here. I'm going to adjust a little bit. And they're able to read the outside world around them to navigate and to be like, okay, I'm going to steer a little bit this way. I'm going to steer a little bit that way. Just the very nuanced changes, so that nothing is really a big leap, in the end. So it's almost like I'm trying to think of maybe like a compass. I think about a compass in a weird way. It's like while you're walking, you're always, you can't walk. Maybe you can walk in a perfectly straight line, but imagine that you're holding a compass and you're walking at a specific direction, but you're moving. There is a floor. There's flooring underneath you that spins in a circle, so it's constantly rotating. I feel like that's the way the world is. The world constantly changes, and in order to keep up with the world and to be accurate in your view of the world, your thoughts also have to constantly change. If the platform underneath you is perpetually spinning and you're walking with a compass and you don't readjust, you don't have a compass so that you continuously walk the direction you're supposed to walk, then you are deluding yourself. So that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it. So change your mind a little at a time. When new information does happen, you have to be very alert. You have to be aware that the world is changing, and so must your thoughts if you want to have a clear perception of reality. And it's the same thing with me as well. Sometimes I really like playing devil's advocate on myself. Sometimes I read books that are polar opposite from each other. Sometimes I entertain thoughts that some people would think would be like, this would be blasphemy, but why not? For example, even if I'm Catholic, I can get along really well with my wife who's agnostic because I understand her point of view and we agree on a few things that maybe some other Christians would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Really? And it's like, well, why not? You know, you honestly, we're programmed a certain way at birth. People who are around us tell us what they want us, what they believe, right? They tell us what they believe, but some of the thoughts they have are antiquated. Sometimes they haven't changed, and it takes somebody who's really, really okay with exploring the other side, you know, as dark as it may be, as light as it may be. That's what ends up, giving truth, is seeing things from both sides. Both sides are consequential, not inconsequential. Anyways, so making those micro adjustments, that's what this is about. So the next section here, recognizing you were wrong makes you better at being right. Uh, it's really awesome because it talks about somebody. It talks about the Japanese Prime Minister, um, Abe, and there's a controversial kind of spot, Yasukuni. And Yasukuni is where, both war criminals and, war heroes are buried. But politically, it's seen as a very, if somebody visits that shrine, that area, other countries usually get angry. And there was a super forecast that was going on, and somebody who was a super forecaster, he predicted that Abe would not shoot himself in the foot by visiting the shrine. In the end, Abe did visit the shrine, but the way the super forecaster kind of like looked at it was like, oh, why was I wrong? What was it about my prediction that was an error? And he realized it was like, wait a second. I think the question that I was really asking was, if I was Abe, would I visit that shrine? Not if he would do it himself. And because he shifted his way of thinking, it guided him to understand more of why he was wrong and why he was off. Again, it's like the moving platform underneath your feet while you're trying to go, a specific degree, following your compass. Wait, why am I wrong? You have to ask yourself when you are wrong, wait, why am I wrong? Why is my prediction, why didn't it work? And sometimes that's really a big part of understanding the truth and knowing truth more intimately is, okay, where did I go wrong? What really went on here? And what was my thought process? And why didn't it end up working the way I thought it would be? So that's awesome. Hello. Okay, so this is still working. Great. So the next part of this is learning domain general lessons. And it's talking about how, when it comes to misjudging anything, when it comes to, it could be the silliest thing or it can be something very serious, being able to recognize that you're wrong and use that as an opportunity to hone your judgment and hone your thinking process, it's like a very universal, it ends up being universally healthy for you. So with anything, it's basically saying, regardless of how big or small the issue may be, if you are wrong in something, it always does benefit you to evaluate why you were wrong and make those adjustments, and to not take things lightly just because they may be just very small. So, for example, if I assume that my wife likes ketchup with her food, that's not a small thing. Or I assume that if I upload something, that certain people will be okay with me uploading it, even if I'm sharing personal stories or whatever. you know, stuff like that. Bigger things and smaller things, depending on the person, what they they see as uh, important or more weighty to them than others. Um, doesn't matter, honing your judgment. Uh, it works to all of these things. So, in the very end of this section, there's well, that's the end of the section, but Julia introduces us to the new part of the chapter, which is so far we've been realizing that super forecasters, they make micro adjustments and they take every single opportunity to hone their decision making skill regardless of what they may or may not be right or wrong in. So yeah, let's see what this next part is. It says admitting a mistake versus updating. All right. No, this section is a really fun one. So, admitting a mistake versus updating. And it's funny because earlier, I feel like that's kind of what I was kind of like mentioning. The idea that you make micro adjustments because you're updating your information about the world. The world is changing. You're moving on a moving platform. So, you're moving and the platform beneath you is moving. And you have to update in order to keep real, with things, to update to your version of reality today is different than the version of your reality tomorrow, because the world tomorrow is going to be different than the world today. Not just the way it is, and updating is actually beneficial. In this section, Julia says that a lot of people think that being wrong is seen as, a confession, or you have to admit, which means that you have to feel guilty if you're wrong or you concede. And a lot of people who are okay with being wrong, they're just like, yeah, no, I was wrong. Or like they will continue with their conversation. And you don't actually get the impression that they think they were wrong because they never confess. They never say, oh, I'm sorry. Being wrong doesn't mean you have to apologize for it necessarily. Although as a formality, it is nice to let people know when you've messed up and you're like, okay, yeah, no, I'll do that. So, with that said, I think that, yeah, this is something that really does make somebody more prone to updating or revising or making micro adjustments. I play a game called Super Smash. Super Smash is all about the very small details. Super Smash is a fighting game on the Nintendo Switch, and when you play against somebody, you have to take in a lot of information. How do they attack? What's their plan? How do they defend? How do they counter you? What are their habits? What do they tend to do? And you have to piece that all together while you're in the middle of fighting them. And in order to defeat them, you have to be able to read them. And if you don't update, and if you don't take in that knowledge and act accordingly extremely quickly, you will die. Because they'll figure you out. As you are figuring them out, they are also trying to figure you out. And if you're not updating, if you're not doing anything new, if you're not reading them and you're staying static, you're going to lose. The greatest fighters of that game, they know how to adapt, they know how to read, and they know how to update. And they also understand that their opponent is also updating their information about their attack and their way of battle. And because of this, it's extremely dynamic. Takes a lot of, it's a very mental thing. But if you are so set in your ways, you're so set in your plan of offense, if you're so set on your interpretation of who this person is, you're going to lose. Because you're going to overassume everything. While the other person, if they are actually actively, thinking about what you're doing, they're moving way beyond you. They're already 3 steps ahead of you. They already know what you're going to do before you do it. Because you're so stuck in your own ways. So, even with fighting games, when you take it to the highest level and you realize, like, oh shoot, I can't stay this way. You're forced to think as a scout. Yeah, I guess you can really say that. You are forced to think as a scout. So that's what's actually really interesting about it. Admitting a mistake versus updating. And do you ever have to apologize when you're in the midst of battle? When you're playing Super Smash and you're fighting against your enemy? Do you have to apologize for saying, oh, I'm sorry, like I thought you were going to do this, you know? So, no, like it's war, you know? And scout mindset in war, just because it's what's interesting is that just because it's called scout mindset doesn't mean it's not aggressive, or it doesn't mean that this is what I'm realizing. Scout is a very deceptive word because you would think that scout is, oh, nice, friendly, I'm not going to use this information against you. Well, usually that's exactly what a scout's going to do. It's going to use a scout. If they're against you, they're going to use their and I know I'm talking about war here, but they're going to use the evidence that they've gathered and compiled effectively, better than you can. So it's really more about scout versus soldier, and I think on the greatest planes of intellectual and strategical tactical war, that's what it's all about. And I know I use the same kind of word, but that's what strategy is. That's what it means to uh, go and change things up, be able to read what's going on and to adjust accordingly. So I think that's super awesome. So the next section is, if you're not changing your mind, you're doing something wrong. And it's this idea of an organization that says if we're doing the same thing 5 years from now, then we're not being optimal, because in 5 years things have changed. There must be a better way of what we're doing. There must be a better way to do what we're doing. And I feel like that's always the way that I look at my life too, is that even back 4 or 5 years ago, when I had this immaculate schedule, I had an immaculate kind of like set of goals that I was going towards, and I was following it very religiously. There came a point where I was realizing, wait, am I overworking myself? Is this optimal? I mean, I'm getting things done, but what is this doing? Is this going to be healthy for my relationship? Am I really living life, or am I just missing the forest for the trees? Am I getting all my goals, but there's nothing. There's nothing of substance. At the end of the day, I'm just a machine that's being used to, to get goals, right? Is there really any life behind my living, right? Because there's a difference between getting your goals and living with your goals, living towards your goals. Because I feel like, a lot when it comes to success theory, it's always about, okay, these are your goals, you have to get it, and you have to be the most efficient at it, and there are many times when you're very efficient at getting your goals and you do get it, but in the end, you don't really feel anything. You're like, oh, okay, well, I have my perfect weight, I'm at my perfect shape, but then it's like, okay, and you realize you never enjoyed the process the whole time, and that's why I think that enjoying the process is also really important, and also changing things up. Sometimes it's not about just being super efficient. Maybe that's not what life is all about. When it comes down to anything, even when you work on a project or something, sometimes we have to make it. We think that it has to be perfect in order to before we put it out there. But then there's always the whole idea of like, well, why not learn along the way? Sometimes learning along the way is going to really, be what matters most. Not that you had to be perfect in the first time, but you learned. Like people who are learning Japanese, there are times where you're going to mess up a lot. You will. But especially with my students and the way that I teach them is that, yeah, you're going to mess up, but that's fine. Like, okay, so you messed up. You're learning. Of course you're going to mess up. Of course you're not going to know as much as I do. I'm ahead of you. That's fine. That's not what matters. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. What matters is if what you're doing is it really what you want to be doing. And if it's not what you really want to be doing, then this is probably not the place for you, right? So when does it start becoming a chore rather than an experience? I think that's what's most important. So, anyways, though, updating is super important, both in the fact that when you put it into the perspective of this idea of evolution, that we have to evolve. If you're not changing, you're falling behind because everybody else is changing. The world is changing. And we have to readjust. Okay, so last part. Wow, this is the end already. So, great, awesome. So, basically the idea is that, okay, so we know now, think of being wrong as, just updating yourself. Nothing crazy about that. But now you have to face the idea of when you become confused. Not about when you're wrong, but when you're confused. How do you deal with that? How do scouts cope with surprise? Interesting. Well, I have to say, today's been pretty good. Just like with Julia's chapter here, talking about like updating and admitting you're wrong, I've been doing a few things here with this specific audio video program, I guess, that I'm putting out there. I'm changing things. I'm noticing that my time is a lot shorter than before. I think I'm getting to the point a lot faster. And I'm trying to introduce new ideas, that are, from my own experience again, that are vastly different than what she points out, to hopefully, color the whole topic in my own kind of specific way that has my signature on it, right? Also, I've noticed that when I tend to talk, I tend to just like when I'm doing this, I tend to I talk and my eyes are kind of just like looking out there, like I'm just like, whoa, like I'm not focused, and I'm realizing like, okay, wait a second, what if I look at a camera while I'm doing this? I know it's an audio video, but I'm looking at a camera and I'm actually making gestures as if, the viewer, you, who is listening to me, whoever you may be, that I'm actually talking to you as if I were talking to somebody right next to me. And this is part of my growth as quote unquote baby YouTuber, I guess, So all these micro adjustments. So let's see what this evolves into. I'm really excited. So anyways, you guys, again, I don't know if you've been listening from the start and now you're here. We're in part 4 right now. We're going to chapter 11. According to Kindle, we're about 44% of the way, so not even halfway done. But I do want to thank you guys for coming in, listening, to me and my thoughts. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to next time when we're able to, go a little bit deeper into this topic and really see what is Scout Mindset and how can it help us. Okay, so future note, I'm going to have to turn off notifications from my phone when I'm doing this because these sounds are kind of distracting. Anyway, so you guys have a good one, and until next time, enjoy life.